Hey guys, welcome back to We Got Balls. And today we are going to be talking about one of those hard and heavy conversations that you don't want to talk about because, frankly, nobody ever bothered to have it with you. We're going to be talking about emotional disengagement in your family system. And so, guys, if you're listening to this episode and you feel like you're alone and you feel like nobody understands you and there's nobody there for you, we're going to explain why that is in the next 30 minutes. And you want to stick around for that as we really get deep into what it means to be lonely. Scott, I don't know if you've had that feeling. I grew up like that was the word that I described for myself growing up was I'm alone. I feel lonely all the time.
Oh
And it
yeah.
just kind of like sticks in my body. Just,
Yeah.
ugh.
Yeah, I not only have that feeling, I have images of me being alone. I can locate them in time and space where it's like I'm looking at myself from the outside going, that guy is really feeling
It's
alone.
like the lonely little boy on the porch holding his balloon and nobody's there to love
Or like,
him. Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
it's sad that that's where we are, but there's a lot of dudes going through this life, and that's exactly how they feel about themselves.
Yeah. So the famous quote by Kurt Thompson, we keep talking about over and over. We all come into this life looking for somebody looking for us. And in a disengaged family system, you don't find anybody looking for you. Your mom and dad are busy, and their busyness with whatever form that comes in. There can be a lot of seemingly legitimate reasons for this. You could have maybe a sibling that has significant health problems, and it pulls the weight of the family in that direction, and so you become the ignored little boy because everything's okay with you and they just put you on autopilot. It can be because you have a lot of kids in your family and you're one of eight. It
Think the Duggars. I watched that documentary, Shiny Happy People, a few
Oh
months
yeah.
ago,
Yeah.
and you know how they had so many kids, they assigned older kids to take care of younger kids. So imagine how disengaged that must have felt when neither child was being attuned to
Yeah.
by a parent.
Yeah. That's a great point, and this can occur a lot in very religious homes because mom and dad are always at church. We're going to go learn about Jesus all the time, 24/7. So there's no real engagement of the child's heart outside of lots of activity. So I would say a disengaged home, when we talk about the rigid home, we talk about lots of rules and regulations but no relational warmth. I think in a disengaged home it's lots of activity and lots of stuff going on but not a lot of emotional connection. And so your heart is unattended. And what does that do to us then? If we come into the world looking for somebody looking for us and we're not finding engagement in our mother and father, particularly in the first 4 years of our lives, it's going to set us up for then constantly scanning the world to find that person looking to bring delight into our lives. And oh man, what a mess that can be.
Yeah, but Scott, we got to go back beyond this because I think there really is a fundamental harm in not seeing a child and then giving them a system which feels like it's good, normal, okay. I mean, I can't count the number of guys that I've sat with and they told me I was raised in a good home. Maybe even they'll throw this I was raised in a good Christian home. And then they'll throw in this mom and dad loved me. Now, let's get really curious about that point. What does it mean to be raised in a home where there's a lot of rules many times and there's not a lot of attunement, not a lot of seeing you, because that's what attunement means, being seen. And yet the words I love you are spoken, right? And it's kind of this, I'm doing the right thing. And let me be very precise. I think these parents did love their kids in a way. There wasn't hate, there wasn't disdain for them. They weren't lying to them when they said I love you, but they themselves didn't know what it truly meant to be seen. And so they were doing quote unquote the best that they could, not always the best excuse or the correct excuse. But the reality is there's this whole system of behavior that is about children being seen and not heard, not really even truly seen, just present, right? Don't be a problem. And so you get this narrative in your childhood around, I was good. My parents loved me. And yet I have all these problems. And so inevitably that creates a huge sense of chaos and confusion and shame.
Yeah. And I also think too, like a lot of the busyness of the culture drives a lot of this. So consider this, that, in the 40s and 50s, there were very few single double parent income households. Like the husband went away to work and the mom stayed home with the kids. So at
Yeah, so
least
we're talking about Leave It to Beaver,
yeah,
dad goes off to work, mom stays home, kids go to school, kids always have a parent that are there kind of watching after them.
yeah, there's at least half the parentage there, right? And so, but when houses start becoming more expensive, we start financing things, we start putting things on credit. Cars now cost more money. Like we begin to enter this consumptive phase of the American culture, and that consumptive phase demands to be fed by a lot of income, and it requires, along with kind of the feminist movement, which liberates women to go into the work environment. Maybe there's some good parts about not keeping women just in this housekeeper role. Not everybody's great for kind of being the household head, and maybe women are called for other things. Some women are called to do other stuff, but in general, it's done a lot of harm because now it requires both parents to be working to feed our consumptive lifestyle, and you get the rise of the latchkey kid. And I guarantee you that almost 70% of our audience grew up in a home where they came home from school and the TV was their caretaker.
So that's an important point to make, because I think there's just like there were a number of reasons people could be from emotionally disengaged homes. I think there's a number of reasons that parents in our generation and following were unable to attune emotionally to their kids. I mean, for my story, my parents had very rigid and or broken parents. My mom's mom was in a mental institution for much of her childhood. She was raised by a nanny and a grandmother while my granddad was working. And so there wasn't a lot of attunement and nurture and care for her. So she was out to look out for herself. My mom was, because nobody taught her how to take care of herself first. So she was still learning that in her 30s and 40s, raising me. And my dad, on the other side of that story, had a great mom, but dad was very rigid and very judgmental and very critical. And so he was the oldest and he was trying to prove himself to be good enough, and left the house at 15 to get a job. Frankly, he was a preacher at 15. Can you believe that? To
Hmm.
be a preacher at 15 years old
Yeah.
and
Well, you
feel
know
like
so
that's
much
your
about the
identity.
world at 15. You've got a lot to
Yeah.
offer.
All this wisdom, I've memorized two verses of scripture, and I got two sermons. And that's where he went into the world. And he was coping with that. And that desire to prove himself and to be seen as worthy and good enough never left him. In fact, still to this day in his 70s, still trying to prove himself in some way. And so two people meet each other, and for why the hell they got married, I have no idea, because that never should have worked out, but it did, long enough for me to come around and my sister to come around before my parents got divorced. That's a whole other thing we'll get into later. But this idea, these two parents, that they showed up, they said all the right words. I don't have a memory of being physically abused. I don't have a memory of being sexually abused. Um, I, I I experienced a lot of emotional neglect and a lot of spiritual abuse. And yet here I do struggle, as I have, with sexual brokenness for decades of my life. Like, I'm the person you should look at and go, there's nothing wrong with you. It's all your fault. So why do I feel like sometimes I got to fix this when I've got this situation that I know in my head has caused all this harm?
Well, I mean, the fundamental thing is, and this is what the neurobiological and attachment research will tell you, is neglect is more harmful than actual sexual or physical abuse.
Can you say that one more time? Because I don't think I heard you.
Neglect is a more damaging form of trauma. We talk about trauma a lot on this podcast because a lot of most all of our sexual struggles emerge out of a traumatic childhood. We call that complex trauma, where you may not have a lot of big traumatic events, but you have lots of paper cuts and you're dying the death of 1,000 traumatic cuts. And those cuts are relational. So they can come in active form of trauma where you're actually abused physically, emotionally, sexually, spiritually, where somebody's actually doing intentional harm on you. But the more damaging form of trauma is the neglect side. You have abuse and then you have neglect. Neglect is you just don't get your developmental needs met in a healthy way. And the biggest developmental need you and I have, Chris, is to be delighted in.
Ooh, so true. So true.
Right? You were created, I was created by a God who creates a universe out of delight, not out of necessity, out of pure joy and artistry and excitement and fun. And he creates the universe in such a way, not that it just spins off on its own, like deism kind of was the belief system that the early American founders had. Well, God just spits out the universe and just walks away. In the Christian view, God is intimately involved with his creation to the point of longing for a relationship with you and me. So he creates us in such a way that we long for him because he longs for us, and we long for one another. We long to be delighted in essence, both by God and by others. And that's intentional. That's God's design. So you're never going to get away from that. And when that fundamental metaphysical reality of longing is not met in our family system, which is God's original intention, you're left wanting more. So, where do you take your desires, your longings, and your disappointments when you grow up in a place where nobody's seeing you, nobody's delighting in you, nobody's engaging your heart?
Well, I know from experience that most guys take it into sexuality because they're looking for a place to connect on a human level and feel and experience longing and desire. And they want some excitement with it. They want a little arousal to tap in with that because they're young and they're male. And so now you have this environment where I am finding this experience that I wanted all along with other women or other men, young women, young men, hopefully in that space. And it becomes thrilling, or with porn. And there's this experience in my body of watching people be sexual and alive and attuned to one another. Cause that's, good sex is about attunement. I see you. What do you want? What makes you come alive? You see me. What do I want? What makes me come alive? We give and we take back and forth with one another. And that, man, that's just like the drug from I want to say the drug from heaven, but would I get in trouble for saying the drug from heaven?
No, that's perfectly fine.
All right. Okay.
because
That's just like,
because literally there is a drug from heaven called dopamine, right? and and it's
yeah.
released at a huge level in orgasm. In fact, the only thing that creates more dopamine in your brain than an orgasm is methamphetamines. The only thing. So there's a sense in which God creates us to be completely motivated by that sense of euphoria and rapture of being delighted in, of being seen and seen and all of that. And so when you're not getting that foundationally, relationally, you're going to go out and seek it kind of objectively outside of relational context, which is what sexual addiction is. And you can conceive of sexual addiction and pornography addiction as basically a dysfunction in the attachment connection, in the way that attachment was designed to be formed in your life through attuned continual experiences of attunement with your mother and your father. You learn to be seen, you feel delighted, and you feel felt by your parents. And when that happens consistently, you don't grow up with this emptiness inside. But when that doesn't happen consistently, there's a vacuum there. And that vacuum is easily filled with sexual pleasure because, wherever I go, there my penis is. And once I discover that rubbing my erect penis produces a lot of pleasure, it's a great escape from the pain that emotional loneliness is causing in my body.
Mm.
And it works. It works. And I
for
crave
for
it
a time. For a time it works. For a
for
time.
it for a time.
Yeah.
But it also leaves me with a lot of loneliness because
Yeah.
I'm not really bonding with a person. I'm bonding with an experience. I'm bonding with sex as the experience, not the
Okay.
person.
Let's get into that, because that I think is really, really important to differentiate, is when we're looking for emotional connection, the opposite of what we did not experience growing up. That's found in a person, a person who is sometimes there, sometimes not, but safe. Sometimes seeing us all the way, all the time, but oftentimes connecting with us emotionally and helping us feel secure. And here's an important word: attached, securely attached to them. When we're bonding with an experience, that's impersonal. Now, it may be using a person to get there. And let me break that down, what I mean by that. When I'm looking at porn, I'm looking at a flat image. When I'm acting out with another person, I'm using that person as porn in real life. And so they are not a human being to me. They're a composite of flesh and organs and voices and noises and touches. And so it's essentially, as we've talked about several weeks ago, we talked about the emergence of AI and sex robots. We're using a person as a tool to be able to accomplish a level of satisfaction and excitement and arousal that will distract us from the fact that we're not personally connected with the people that we really want to be connected with.
And that doesn't create a bond. It doesn't
No.
create any sense of connection or attachment with the person, even though you're having sex with them, which is why you can be in a committed relationship and still be using pornography or being going to see prostitutes or getting hand jobs at a massage parlor or whatever, because there's that insatiable quality of your sexual relationship with your spouse doesn't feel the need because it's not really based on intimacy. You're still working out your wound by trying to have sex with your partner. And boy,
Yes.
that's an easy way to kill desire. Make sex
Yeah.
an expectation of the relationship instead of
Yes.
flowing naturally out of connection and care. And guys don't
Did we just
understand
blow
that.
up half of religious sexual relationships?
Yeah,
we just
we
we
just
just dropped the bomb in the toilet and just
we just
exploded.
destroyed the majority of Christianity's view of sexuality. Like,
Yeah,
this is
unfortunately.
your entitlement, men. Be sure you get this from your wife. And wives, if you don't put out, he's going to go out. So you better give it up.
Dude,
And
duty sex is the worst. It
yeah,
is the worst.
yeah. But it creates that sense of entitlement in the guy, and it creates a sense of lack of desire in the woman. Okay, so who wants to do that? Who can get relaxed when you have to perform? And so there's no satiation to that longing for connection. It's just purely focused on the sexual activity as the means to an end, and it's not going anywhere. So there's an emptiness every time. And you have to be curious about, how does this start in my life when I'm growing up and I come home from school? Who's engaging my heart? Who's looking me in the face and going, "Hey, buddy, you look kind of down today. What's going on? Tell me."
And let's be really specific about that, Scott, because there is an assumption amongst a lot of people that we talk to that nobody's supposed to be doing that. That there isn't, they haven't seen that attunement, that, hey buddy, what's going on? You look down, or what happened? Or this happens a lot when someone talks about being sexually abused or having a unique sexual experience, and they come home, and of course there's silence, like there's always been silence around the house, and no attunement. And they're like, well, they blame themselves. And I was like, well, I must have done something wrong, or I was a bad boy, or I shouldn't have done that. And what you're talking about is that there's a look on the face of a child or a young person that can be attuned to. Are you sure this is possible?
Yeah, I'm sure it's possible because I've learned to do this. We do it unconsciously, but when you're not paying attention to it, what you pay attention to is what really directs your behavior. So where attention goes, behavior flows. When you learn that the basis of having a healthy life is having attunement, which helps me regulate my big emotions like anger, fear, sadness, shame, and helps me form secure attachment with others, which helps me feel good about myself in my identity. All of those things go together to form a healthy, whole human being who lives in a place of shalom. Shalom is, I feel connected and safe. I feel
And
things are right.
Yeah. And out of that place, that's where you're able to see. Now, I'm sorry, many of our parents didn't do the work to get to that place. They were survivors. They were trying to make it, and they were um, traumatized and hurt people, as we know well from the therapeutic world. So that is one of those things that when we're talking about emotional disengagement, it's got to be brought up. Is that my parents did not take the time to do the work to be able to see me. Now, I'm not asking you to go yell at your mom or dad or to curse or to piss on their grave or something, curse them for what they didn't do. I'm just asking you to grieve that reality that you didn't get the thing that you desperately wanted and desperately needed as a child, which sets you up to seek it elsewhere in a way that was unfulfilling and chaotic.
And on top of that, not only grieve what was lost, but find a community where you can now get attunement, help regulating your affect, and what's called earned secure attachment in that process of telling your stories of how you didn't get engagement growing up and receiving care and comfort and connection from a safe community of other people as you engage that story, because both of those aspects are healing, grieving my losses, but also having a place where I can now be seen. I feel safe. I can receive soothing or stimulation, and that creates real neurobiological change, what we call security. I feel secure. I can engage the world knowing I'm a good person, people are reliable, and I sexuality falls into the proper place in my life. It's used as a way to connect in an intimate relationship rather than a way to seek intimacy.
That's
And
really interesting that you say that because I think I've experienced that. I've heard other guys experience that. That my need for sex shifts as I get connected with other people in a healthy way.
yeah, because we could say it this way: the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of sex addiction is not having uh, it's not pursuing your sexual needs. It's finding connection in healthy ways so that you can enjoy sexuality in the way it was intended, not as a demand, not as an entitlement, not as a must have, but as an enjoyable extension of care and play and a sense of connection and delight in one another. And so when you can get that in relationship with other guys, it changes your neurobiology. It frees you to be the person you were intended to be in the first place. So we're basically in our recovery process, in our recovery groups, and Alexander Kathakis, who's one of the leading sex researchers and addiction recovery specialists, will tell you that if you want to experience real neurobiological change in addiction recovery, get in a group, because groups actually create more neurobiological change faster than individual therapy. Why? Because of the extensive network of care that's there, right? You can see a therapist once a week, or you can see a coach once a week for 45 minutes, and we believe in that. And there is that therapeutic alliance between us and a client where they really do get healing in our relationship with them. But they were created for more. And so when they're in a group with other guys, they start building those connections with one another. That becomes exceptionally healing and accelerates the healing process. So we were wounded in a community called a family. We heal by going back into a community and getting the things that we never got. So
Well, isn't it that we're creating a new family, Scott? Is that we're responsible as adults to make our own family?
that's
And
right.
yes, there is still mom and dad and brother and sister and people that we have to interact with, and that we some I should rephrase that, people that we have the opportunity to interact with. But the reality is that when we're in a place of doing our work as adults, it's up to me to find that family. And what a group does is becomes, as the Bible says, these are your mother and your brother and your sisters and your father. These people, whether they're men, and we feel like men's groups are really healthy start to that, to find that experience, to be able to connect. So we're going to make an announcement right here. So we're excited to announce that, hey, guess what? not only are we podcast friends and friends in real life, we're actually going to be working together. And what we want to do in this dynamic is we want to give you a space, an accessible space to be able to come in and engage your story in a group just like this with other people. So you may be listening to this and you may have listened for a long time and you haven't figured out what to do with it. Here's an open door for you. Go to successfulmen.com and we're going to have the opportunity for you to sign up for a group that will be very affordable and a great start for you to begin to work in your recovery process. And that's because Scott and I are joining forces. We're going to be working together on this. And we want to continue to support you because what Scott is saying is absolutely true. You cannot begin this process of healing alone. And it's really hard to even begin it if you're only working with an individual coach or therapist. You need the eyes, you need the faces of other men, and it's possible. I mean, dude, our relationship was built on Zoom. We didn't meet for 2 years in person, and we got to be able to be intimate and connected and attuned to one another just by sitting in the same space and talking together and really connecting as friends.
Yeah.
So we want to offer that to you guys as well.
And we have done this, both you and I have done this for years. We have tons of experience doing this, both online groups and in-person groups. And so joining forces makes a lot of sense because we want to bring this really beautiful kind of healing community to a lot of other men and make that expand our ability to serve others. And this is really life-changing. The hardest part about recovery is finding healthy friendships and safe community. And it's very difficult to find. You can go and get involved in a lot of 12-step groups. And we talked about this in the last episode of the podcast. Some of that creates kind of the pink cloud recovery. And it's just try harder and do more. We're not about that. We're about actually engaging our stories of harm and finding care and attunement and connection in the midst of those places where we felt most disengaged and alone. And we have a loneliness epidemic among men in this country. The largest group committing suicide are 40 to 50-year-old men in this country. The reason why is because they're alone. They feel alone. And this has been, I think, a target of evil is to isolate men. Particularly what pornography and sexual addiction does is it fragments us. It isolates us to make us believe that we're worthless, that if anybody found out what we were really like, we would be rejected. And it keeps us in this disconnected state. We call that dissociation psychologically, but it's basically just I'm numbed out. I'm not in tune with what's going on in my body because I don't want to feel these bad feelings of being alone, of being unwanted. And our communities are about reversing that one story at a time. One guy telling his life story and receiving care in the midst of doing this with other guys. And I can tell you from the majority of guys that we work with, disengagement is the number one contributor to their addictive problems because we hear it all the time. I came from a Christian family. Like you said, there's food on the table, there's clothes on my back, but there's nobody beholding my face when I come home from school. I'm raised by Star Trek on TV, or I'm raised by hentai porn for God's sake. And the loneliness that becomes a part of the fabric of my life has to be undone at that point.
And that is how we want to invite you into that. That's how we've done it, is to love your loneliness. It's a very young place. As you were talking, Scott, I felt very young again. I felt like I was 10, 11, 12 years old, just looking for someone, looking for me. And I know there's a lot of men out there listening to this, and maybe women who have husbands who are listening to this, that they just want to be connected. And so that is a real human need and a real transformational experience. And we just want to invite you into it, to check out the opportunity to do that. You can do that with us. I mean, do that with whoever. We don't care. We want you to be connected. But if you're not doing anything and you want to do something, start getting connected with a group at successfulmen.com. And we can begin that process with you and see where it goes. I mean, that's the beauty of this, is that you get to try anything out and say, hey, this was great, or not for me. Totally cool. We don't care. We just want you to take a step. And we know that the hardest thing to do from your loneliness is to take a step to take care of yourself, because there's so much shame that's piled up behind that emotional disengagement from your family system that you have to wade through and you have to push against to even do one or two things good for yourself that can bring some transformation and healing. So we just want to be with you guys. That's it. That's the optimal word, with. We're here to be with you. Grateful for the time to connect, and we look forward to sharing more about what's going on with us in the future. And as always, please keep listening and tuning in, subscribe, and leave comments and rating and reviews on all the platforms for us here at We Got Balls.
And you do too.
Take care, guys.
Don't forget to subscribe for more episodes. You can connect with Chris and with Scott at successfulmen.com.